The story everyone is missing is not about Syria. It is about how power fails when attention replaces architecture. Right now, Donald Trump's Syria policy is quietly drifting toward collapse, not because of one dramatic mistake, but because nothing solid was built underneath the headlines. Two U.S. partners are now fighting each other in Aleppo, the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. At the same time, U.S. brokered talks between Syria and Israel are stalling. No timeline, no enforcement, no guarantees. This is what happens when diplomacy produces moments, not mechanisms. A handshake without scaffolding, a deal without a spine. And when the process fails, it is never the leaders who pay first. It is civilians, families, more than 150,000 displaced in days. If you care about how foreign policy actually works, not how it sounds, stay with me. Because to understand why this is unraveling, we need to look beneath the headlines. And that begins with what Trump's diplomacy gets right and what it systematically ignores. Let's step back. What is happening in Syria is not chaos. It is structure failing under pressure. The United States is now backing two opposing forces, the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Both are treated as partners. Both are essential, and both are locked in a zero-sum struggle over power, territory, and control. At the same time, Washington is trying to broker calm between Syria and Israel, without resolving land, without resolving security, without resolving trust. On paper, this looks manageable. Separate tracks, separate talks, separate problems. In reality, these crises are connected, militarily, politically, psychologically. When one track stalls, the others destabilize. When negotiations lack enforcement, actors hedge. They mobilize forces. They test red lines. This is the core flaw. U.S. diplomacy has focused on unlocking doors, but not on building corridors behind them. To see how this pattern emerged, we have to go back, not years, but to the moment when Syria's political order collapsed. To understand this moment, you have to remember what Syria has been living through. Not just war, but fragmentation as a system. For more than a decade, the Syrian state ceased to function as a single authority. Power splintered, territory fractured, loyalty became local, not national. Then in December 2024, the Assad regime fell. What followed was not clarity, it was a vacuum. Into that vacuum stepped multiple actors. The Syrian government struggling to reassert central control, the SDF governing large parts of the northeast with its own institutions, and external powers, each pushing their preferred outcome. The U.S. saw an opening: stability through rapid deals, legitimacy through recognition, momentum through symbolism. But Syria's conflict was never just about leaders. It was about structure. Who controls force? Who governs locally? Who owns resources? When those questions are postponed, history doesn't wait. It returns as violence. And that brings us to the first rupture, when diplomacy stalled and guns answered instead. The warning came quietly, then all at once. On the 6th of January, government forces moved into Kurdish-majority neighborhoods in Aleppo. The areas were declared closed military zones. No ambiguity, no buffer. Within days, more than 150,000 people were displaced. Families fled toward Afrin, others into SDF-controlled areas in northeast Syria. This was not a spontaneous clash, it was the product of paralysis. For months, talks over military integration had stalled. Damascus demanded absorption. Individual fighters, central command, the SDF refused. They insisted on cohesion, identity, local authority. With no enforcement mechanism, both sides hedged, positions hardened, trust evaporated. A short ceasefire on the 8th of January allowed evacuations, but the damage was done. Sporadic violence continued, confidence collapsed. If this pattern feels familiar, it should. Headline diplomacy opens doors, but without structure, conflict walks straight through. And behind this crisis lies a deeper problem, one embedded in how these deals were built. What failed in Syria was not intent, it was design. The agreements exist on paper, but they lack what actually makes peace hold: institutions, timelines, verification, dispute resolution. The March 2025 agreement between the Syrian government and the SDF promised integration and political participation in principle. In reality, every critical detail was deferred: who commands the forces, how decentralization works, who controls oil fields, border crossings, and revenue. Instead of a system, the process relied on presence: U.S. mediators in the room, pressure in the moment, momentum by proximity. When they leave, the structure collapses. This is diplomacy without scaffolding: no ministries engaged, no budgets allocated, no monitoring body empowered. Actors learn the lesson quickly: delay favors force, ambiguity rewards escalation. The result is predictable: talks stall, positions harden, violence resumes. And while this mechanism was breaking down internally, another fault line was widening to the south, along a border that has never truly been settled. While Aleppo burned, another negotiation was quietly freezing. The conflict between Syria and Israel never disappeared. It was only postponed. After the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024, Israel moved fast. Forces entered the UN-monitored buffer zone south of the Golan Heights. Positions were taken on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Air operations expanded across Syrian territory. From Israel's perspective, this was prevention. From Syria's perspective, occupation. The United States tried to mediate. There were 5 rounds of talks. The latest in Paris on the 6th of January brought senior officials face to face. The outcome sounded promising: a joint communication cell, U.S. oversight, information sharing, de-escalation. But the core issues remained untouched. Syria demanded a binding withdrawal timeline. Israel demanded security guarantees, demilitarization, protections for minorities. Without resolution, each side prepared for the worst. Diplomacy slowed, military logic accelerated. This is how frozen conflicts thaw, not through breakthroughs, but through drift. And when states drift, it is ordinary people who absorb the shock. Which brings us to the human cost. If you are watching this from afar, it can still feel abstract: borders, talks, security arrangements. But for you, if you live inside this system, none of it is theoretical. When negotiations stall, checkpoints multiply. When trust collapses, markets freeze. When power hedges, civilians move. More than 150,000 people did not relocate because of ideology. They ran because gunfire doesn't wait for communiques. You lose work first, then school, then electricity, then the sense that tomorrow is predictable. And here is the most dangerous part: you stop believing anyone is actually in charge. Headline diplomacy feels distant, but its absence of structure shows up in your kitchen, in fuel prices, in curfews, in fear. This is why implementation matters, not for diplomats, for people who cannot leave. If this analysis helps you see the system more clearly, share it, because understanding how power fails is the first step toward demanding better. And Syria is not alone. The shock waves do not stop at its borders. Syria does not collapse in isolation. It radiates instability. Every stalled deal sends signals outward, to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan. When governance fails, borders harden. When violence resumes, migration follows. When authority fragments, armed groups adapt. For Europe, this is not distant. Instability in Syria translates into irregular migration, into counter-terrorism pressure, into political strain at home. Regionally, the stakes are even higher. A breakdown between Damascus and the SDF risks pulling in neighboring powers. A frozen conflict with Israel raises the chance of miscalculation. One incident, one misread signal, one escalation. This is how local failures become regional crises. And yet, there is an actor uniquely positioned to intervene differently. Not with headlines, but with patience. Not with symbolism, but with structure. To see what comes next, we have to look forward. Not to a single outcome, but to multiple futures, each shaped by choices made now. There are three paths ahead for Syria. None are clean. All are political. The first is the best-case scenario. The European Union steps in, not rhetorically, institutionally. A long-term framework is built, conditional sanctions relief, clear benchmarks for inclusive governance, monitoring, verification. This does not solve everything, but it slows escalation. It gives civilians breathing room. The second path is muddling through, short-term fixes, temporary ceasefires, economic sidetracks, violence ebbs, then returns. Nothing collapses fully. Nothing stabilizes either. This is the illusion of progress. The third path is the most dangerous. Headline diplomacy continues. Implementation is deferred. Red lines are tested. Aleppo becomes a template, not an exception. History is clear on this point. Libya, Iraq. Quick fixes create long-term chaos. The future of Syria will not be decided by intent, but by whether anyone is willing to stay, to build, to enforce. And that brings us to the final question. What is unfolding in Syria is not a tragedy of bad intentions. It is a warning about how power now operates. We have entered an era where announcements travel faster than institutions, where recognition comes before responsibility, where deals are declared complete before they are built. Donald Trump's diplomacy thrives in this environment. It creates movement. It commands attention. But Syria exposes the limit of that model because peace is not a moment. It is maintenance. Without enforcement, agreements decay. Without accountability, promises hollow out. Without structure, power reverts to force. This is why the European Union matters, not as a savior, but as a system builder. If Europe steps back, Syria drifts. If everyone chases headlines, civilians pay. And here is the uncomfortable truth. This is not just about Syria. It is about whether diplomacy still means something. If this analysis sharpened how you see global power, stay with me. Share it, challenge it, because the next failure will not announce itself in advance. It will look manageable until suddenly it isn't.